I played this on TTS a long time ago, and I really liked it, and I was looking forward to the final game, and for 2 years I was looking forward to Planet Unknown, and then it showed up, and that's when one of those Kickstarter things kind of bites you in the sense that, like, 2 years of expectation probably wasn't met. Hi, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and this is my review of Planet Unknown, a game from Adam's Apple Games, a game that I've been waiting 2 years for it to finally arrive, and arrive it has, and I've been diving into this one time and time again, and it still holds up. This is a polyomino game that plays between 1 and 6 players. It is a game of rotating this little lazy Susan, having the captain choose the rotation, choosing where it goes, picking a tile, putting it on your board, and having all other players pick a tile from their depot depending on where their specific marker lines up. Everyone's going to have their assigned depot, you'll put your marker there, you'll rotate the board, you'll grab a tile, and you'll place it somewhere onto your planet. That's the core idea. You just rinse and repeat doing that exact action again and again until eventually at some point somebody cannot put anything down on their planet, at which point game end is triggered. That's the entire game. The only nuance at that point is why. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? How are you scoring points in this game? Well, a few different ways ultimately, but the first way is going to be by filling up your planet. You're going to get points for rows and columns that are complete, although complete also means that you cannot have a meteor on that space. So for example, whenever you put down a tile that has a meteor on it, not all of them do, you're going to put a meteor on that spot. And if that meteor is still there at the end of the game, you will not score for that row or column, even if that row or column is complete. That's one way you get points. The bigger the column or row, the more points it's worth, generally between 1 and 3 points, although the boards are asymmetric, so there are some nuances or differences there. That's number one. From there, you're also going to want to collect these spots around the board, and as you collect those, you'll have the opportunity to slot them off to the side, earning you potentially another 6 points as you go there. You might be wondering, how do you actually collect these things? Well, with your rover, of course. How else would you collect this stuff? You're going to have the opportunity throughout the course of the game to up some of these tracks over here, and as you do so, you will earn this rover. The rover will go on the board and can start moving around, collecting meteors in order to score points for them. A few points, you get 1 point for every 3 meteors, as well as grabbing these life pods and putting them there, which is important because you can put things down on top of the life pod, but the game has a bad habit of crushing your board when you do so. If I go ahead and I drop this down on the board, let's say this over here, if I drop this down over here, I'm going to go ahead and put down another meteor, but I'll also crush that life pod to death and will not score points for it. So as you slowly collect the life pods, you free up your board from those little things that are in the way, things you will want to cover. You just ideally want to get the point and cover it at the same time. In a game that goes generally 60 to 80-ish points, an extra 6 points could be 10% of your score if you're a little bit efficient around it. Additionally, you're going to have these tracks over here, these tracks that you're moving up your markers on the tracks, earning a variety of bonuses, but one thing that is consistent across all the tracks is all of them have medals on the tracks. And so you'll score points based on the highest medal you've hit on any given track, and you'll do that for all 5 tracks. Whenever you put a terrain tile on the board, you're going to look at the 2 types of terrain on that tile, and you're going to advance on those 2 trackers. Over here I'm advancing on the water tracker, and I'm advancing the rover tracker, putting my rover on the board for the first time. That's how you advance on those tracks as you go through that. The tracks are also going to give you a variety of abilities that you want to be mindful of. This leftmost track, the Civ track, is going to let you dig into these pile of Civ cards and draw Civ cards level 1, 2, 3, and 4 as you go up them. Those will either give you in-game effects or end-game scoring, but they're generally good things that you'll want, and first come, first serve. The first person there will have more selection over the cards. The second track, the water track, is mostly heavier on the points, but then also they're going to give you all these tracks as well. They're going to give you different icons for little wild symbols where you can move up other tracks, and the water track has more points and more of those little wilds. The biomass track, the forest track, as you put forest tiles down the board, that's going to reward you by giving you little bio patches, whatever they're called, that you're going to be able to put onto the board to fill those gaps that you left open. And as you potentially level up certain techs over here, you may have the opportunity to score them at the end of the game, being even more flexible or accommodating to what you need done. The rover track will put rovers on the board, and then as you continue to move up the track, will allow you to move the rovers around the board, collecting those life pods and meteors. And then finally, the tech track is primarily how you unlock tech, although again, corporations are asymmetric in this game, and so the planets and corporations are all going to give you small little nuanced differences to everything I just told you. The final thing you really need to be aware of before you dive into this is going to be the objectives you're going for. This game, you're going to have objectives between the player to your left and your right. You're always sharing objectives with another player. A 2-player game is a little different, but in general, you're going to have 2 public objectives that you're going for. One that I'm competing with that person, and one that I'm competing with that person. And that's true if it's a 6-person game too. I only care about the player to my left and my right when it comes to those objectives. objectives. Those objectives will give you little small nuances as far as what you're trying to do and why. This objective over here will give me 5 points if I collect the most meteors, which means I'm incentivized to get those meteors onto my planet, but then obviously to collect them as well, rather than having those clog up and stop me from scoring points. On this side over here, that wants me to have the single largest area of energy terrain. This over here is energy terrain, so for example, I might on my next placement want to grab this here and put this like that, which will then connect those two areas, and that will give me an area of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 energy terrain, hopefully beating the player over there. Those are going to give you 5 points if you get the most, 2 points if you're tied, and can be a big chunk of your points. That could be 10 points out of your 60 plus points that you get in the game, which can be a huge part of your score. And then finally, and this is optional, a bunch of things in the game are optional as far as what you want to include and not include, you also have private goals. We like to deal with the private goals, we do like to use them, it gives you another thing to go for. The reverse side of a public goal will have a whole bunch of private goals on them. You'll deal out some from the beginning of the game, you'll select one, and it gives you your own personal objective to go for. You're not competing with another player, you're just trying to achieve a specific thing. So for example, in this case, I want to create a 3x3 area of rover terrain. And because every tile always shares space with other tiles, that is actually harder than it looks. It requires a lot of planning, a lot of precision, and a lot of being, well, just making sure you actually get that to get that done. And that's primarily what's going on in Planet Unknown. You're trying to get the points, you're getting points from objectives, points from filling columns, points from moving up the tracks, you're trying to be mindful of the various bonuses you'll get on the tracks, you're trying to be mindful of your specific planet's differences and your specific corporation's differences. There's going to be this giant stack of corporations, each one having a standard side, which is a good way to introduce players to the game, as well as a unique side that completely breaks the rules. The standard side, for example, of this terrain over here, Universal Corp, will have a little tech track where you move up the tech track as you go, and the higher you go, you'll unlock techs in a specific order. Contrasted with Jump Drive over here, and Jump Drive is going to give me the ability that as I grab these from the board, instead of getting a point with them, I can pop them onto any tech, unlocking any tech in any order, giving me a whole bunch of things I can do, including the ability for my rovers to teleport from matching terrain to matching terrain. Every tech, every corporation gives you a different way for you to break the game. A way in which your board, your special abilities are slightly different, giving you a slightly different puzzle as far as how you approach the game, as well as the same thing with the planets. We'll have a whole bunch of standard planets players can all share, so you can go ahead and dive in that way, as well as custom planets that are all different in what they're doing, the challenges they're giving, extra points they may give you, extra challenges they may get in your way, different restrictions or things, just different nuanced, slight, subtle strategies to the game. I would say the planets don't have as much of a game-changing impact as the corporations, but they're still fun for variety's sake, if nothing else. And that's Planet Unknown. Rinse and repeat, keep rotating the board, choose your tile, until eventually someone cannot place anything, or until one of these two depots is open. Basically, one depot. A depot is comprised of 2 sections, and if a player ever can't take from a section, that also will trigger endgame. And that's it. Which is a good time to dive into the review part of things, starting off with ease of play. And this game is really easy to dive into. The rules are fairly easy to go through. They're a little unnecessarily complicated, I would say. I would say they're not the most cleanly formatted rules I've seen, but ultimately the game is simple enough and easy enough to dive into that the rules are not a significant barrier. It's easy enough to go through the few pages, read everything you need, understand that half the rulebook is just covering the planets and the corporations, so don't be too intimidated by the rulebook when you get it. It's significantly shorter than you think it is, and it gets you up and running fairly quickly. Table space can get large at higher player counts. It's worth noting that. I mean, this is your individual section, so multiply that by the number of players you have, and you have to have room for that. In general, I would say that's not terrible, but just at larger player counts, it can be a factor. Game time is going to come in at roughly 60 minutes. I would say nearly exactly. Every single game we've played, if you exclude the teach, has been roughly around the 50 to 60 minute mark, comes in fairly reliably in a quick play time. As far as player count, this is a 1 to 6 player game. I've played this at everything except 1 and 6 so far. I've played at 2, 3, 4, and 5 players. It accommodates all those player counts well. 1 is a different game. I don't know the rules for the solo play. 2 player has some slight modifications, and then after that, 3 and 6 up are basically the exact same game, just a variety in terms of the number of players. It just means you'll be capped in less often. The game length doesn't really change based on the player count because it's a simultaneous pick. Generally, I find the longest turn every single game is the person who's holding this, the person who gets to rotate, choosing something, and I'm like, I want that tile. At that point, the choice is made, and everyone has to pick from only 2 tiles as opposed to from all the tiles, and so I generally find the captain is a slow turn. That's true whether you're playing with 2 players or whether you're playing with 6. Again, more players can add a drop of time, but not a lot of time. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking. To start off with, the simultaneous play keeps this game moving quickly. This is a game that works well. Again, I haven't played at 6 yet, but even at 5 players, our games come in at an hour, which is significantly better than most other games in this genre. The simultaneous play, everyone picking at the same time, the captain rotates, everyone else chooses, everyone else starts putting it down. You have a game that moves quickly, it plays well at all those player counts. I enjoy it at all those player counts. I don't think I have a strong preference. Lower player counts feels a little less like a fun experience socially. Higher player counts means you're captain less often, so all of them work for me. The simultaneous play just makes this an approachable, easy to table game. It makes it a game that I can pull out a game night not knowing, or bring to a game night not knowing who's going to show up, how many people there are. The playtime falls into just long enough that it's a little bit more than a filler game, but also short enough that I know we can squeeze it in as an extra game depending on the time. And so it's very flexible and accommodating in what it's doing. It's very accessible as a game. The variable planets and corporations keep this game fun. We'll talk about this more in final thoughts, but if not for the variety this game gives you, my opinion would be a drop lower. Still good, but it would be a drop lower. The planets, the corporations keep you coming back. And with 8 different corporations, with 15 different planets, I don't know the exact numbers, with a lot of different planets, and I'm pretty sure it's 8 corporations, that gives you a lot of ways to dive into it. 9 corporations if you include the basic. That means you're 9 plays deep into this game before you've played the same corporation twice. And again, the planet also gives you variety, but not as game-changing. The corporations, though, those force you to try a new strategy every single time because your corporation has a slight difference, even if it's just the text alone, but it forces you to re-examine how you want to approach this specific game of Planet Unknown. That means you're 9 plays deep before you've played remotely the same game, and that's not accounting for the fact that there's going to be different events in play. The event deck is optional, by the way, which is why we didn't talk about it. There's going to be different civs in play, there's going to be different planets in play, and of course you're drawing tiles in different orders, so there's a lot of variety in this box, a lot of ways to dive into the game. And the private goals, the events, all those things mix it up. Again, the private goal is something you can start off without, and for our first game, we didn't use them. We didn't use the private goals, we just used public goals, called it a day, but then we started mixing in the events and the private goals. And the events are a little more all over the place. There's different colors, and you can choose whether you want more beneficial, more neutral, or more punishing events, or you can mix up a deck that comprises any combination therein to suit your playstyle or your group's playstyle. But events are fun and give you more variety, but also can introduce randomness, which might be something you don't like as much. But the private goals really give you a lot of extra nuance and strategy to what you're trying to do, because one of my biggest complaints, which we haven't really gotten to yet, but one of my biggest complaints about Planet Unknown is the fact that you're trying to fill up your board, but I almost want there to be more restriction around how you place your tiles. You don't have to match terrain type. You do have to place your tiles adjacent to a tile you already placed, unless of course you get something that changes that rule, but you do have to place your tiles adjacent to other tiles, but that's not a large restriction, and it's not the end of the world to have to deal with that. But I want almost more restriction. I want more things to be mindful of. Going for large patches of energy, trying to get more meteors, trying to do all these things. And adding in private goals very heavily gives you more things to be mindful of, more criteria you're going for as you build up the game. And something you can choose to do. You can house roll as many private goals as you need to whatever player count to give you that extra degree of balancing different things. If you want, you can give every player 3 private goals, and that will give you even more constriction around how you have to approach the tile placement in Planet Unknown, because now you're not just juggling, okay, I have to place a tile and it has to touch, but rather I have to place a tile, it has to touch, I'm also going for a 3x3 section of rover grid, I also want the largest energy grid, and I want as many of my biomes touching the edge of the planet. The more things you add, the more constriction you add, the more enjoyable it can be if you're looking for that extra level of tightness, and you can adjust the game to give you whatever level of tightness you want. It is very flexible in what you can do with this game. Those private goals, the events, the civ cards, the planets, the corporations, this game gives you a lot of stuff. And I like the rover. The rover gives you a fun, interesting, weird addition to a polyomino game, but one that kind of works. The setting of the rover somewhere on the board, and the managing of the movement, the collection of the life pods, the collection of all those meteors that seem like they're a bad thing, but in reality, if you can make sure to place those meteors in a way that it's on your rover's path anyway, I mean, practically speaking, your rover's going to be moving to these various life pods. So if you can place meteors that are anyways in that zone, why wouldn't you? Go ahead, toss this down over here, put that meteor down, you're anyways going from here to here, why not collect a third of a point on the way? And so those meteors that initially seem like a detractor can become an opportunity as you start moving your rover around the polyomino pieces that you're slotting down onto your planet. As far as what I don't like in the game, I already touched upon this a bit, but I want terrain placement to matter more, which is something that we can deal with by just adding more private goals. But that idea that I almost instinctively, I don't know why necessarily, but I almost instinctively want it to be that you kind of score for all your largest areas of terrain, so you're constantly juggling, trying to keep your terrain together in different ways, and you don't actually have to do that unless you have a goal of some sort that does want you to do that. And so for me, the solution to that slight critique, meaning if you don't have private goals at all, I find the game to often be a bit too freeing, especially if the requirements you get are not related to tile placement, which they can be. Like the meteors over there, not related to tile placement. Or sometimes you'll have things like have as little as possible of a terrain on the planet. So there are different things going on in this experience that change it up, but for me that's more of a critique that goes away mostly once you start introducing private goals, especially if you're willing to start dealing out more to the players to give them more things to be mindful of as you go. The Civ cards can feel a bit uninteresting at times. This entire stack of Civ cards, I mean the text I love, all the text on the various boards, those are all fun, those give you something game breaking. There's one or two that are boring here and there, but for the most part I like the additional stuff that the technologies give you as you go through it. But the Civ cards I often find more boring than not. They often come down to a few extra points, movement up on a track, or the sets of cards you can get, that if you get sets of cards you'll score more for meteors or just score more points. I wish these were more interesting. I wish these were as interesting as the tech cards, and some of them are, but I would say most of them aren't. I wish, I want an entirely new Civ deck that is more interesting and engaging in the way it messes with the experience, as opposed to small little, like, hey, you get a point, or hey, if you collect 4 of these cards, you'll get 10 points. They can be impactful. I'm not saying they're not impactful, I'm saying they're less interesting. And then lastly, and this is not something I often touch on as much in my reviews, but the quality of the components is really not great. Now this is a great game, and we'll get to that more in final thoughts, but the quality of the components, really, I mean, everything here, these boards just, it feels like I got a heavily used game as soon as I opened the box. I don't have an easy way to define it. I don't know if it'll show up on camera, but the edges of the various boards, the edges of these, it feels like cheap material. The Lazy Susan looks very cheap. I mean, I saw somebody who painted their entire plastic grid to make it look more premium, and I totally plan on doing that myself if I can find the time to do so, because it really made it look significantly less, you know, garbage-like. Garbage is very intense. That's very aggressive. This looks cheap. A lot of the components here look subpar compared to what I guess I'm used to nowadays with Kickstarter premium copies. It's not the end of the world. I would rather have a great game with subpar components than a terrible game with great components, or even a subpar game with great components, but it is worth calling out that I wish the components were a bit better, as opposed to feeling like everything is worn as soon as I open the box. As far as I can see others not liking, asymmetric corporations might feel unbalanced. At the end of the day, you can play this game with symmetrical corporations, symmetrical planets, and everyone's playing a fair game, or fair as things can go. Or you can play with the asymmetric corporations, but that does mean you might look at that player and say, oh, your corporation can do that? That's so much more powerful than mine. And I can't possibly comment on the balance of this game. I'd have to play it significantly more with a lot more corporations and take notes on who won, who didn't win. That's not why I'm playing this game. This is a lighter and fun experience, one in which I'm trying to optimize my score, but one in which I certainly don't care if you had a corporation that is slightly more powerful than mine. So I'm not commenting on the game balance, and I am saying it's entirely possible that with the asymmetry, you might look at the game and say, well, that's not balanced, and maybe you're right, maybe you're not. I just don't know, but it's worth bringing up right now. And then lastly, the late game meteors can cost you the game. For the most part, meteors I like as a part of the game, but late game meteorites can be incredibly impactful, especially if you're forced to choose one because of the nature of the grid or the nature of the space you have. If your rovers over here and you go ahead and place down a meteor there, and you suddenly end up costing yourself 5 points in the row and column, sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. And I know those who know the game will say that some of the technologies will prevent late game meteors, or maybe you should make sure that your rover's in the place where you're going to have to put your stuck tiles. There's mitigation around that for sure, but sometimes a late game meteor can be the thing that costs you the game. Does not bother me. Like I said, I'm in this for the fun, and that doesn't really affect my experience, but it might be something that bothers you. As far as final thoughts on Planet Unknown, I really enjoy this game. Although I do think I enjoy it less than I first did, and I think part of that is the 2-year wait that I've had for the game. I played this on TTS a long time ago, and I really liked it, and I was looking forward to the final game, and for 2 years I was looking forward to Planet Unknown, and then it showed up, and that's when one of those Kickstarter things kind of bites you in the sense that, like, 2 years of expectation probably wasn't met. I still love Planet Unknown, I still think it's great, and I still think it's going to be one of my favorite polyomino games, although part of that is based on the fact that there's this much variety. If I was comparing base game alone, if I was comparing starting planet, starting corporation, and never diving into anything else, I think this would be a good game that would eventually leave my collection. The solid gameplay foundation combined with the variety of being able to mix things in and constantly having a different experience, that's going to keep Planet Unknown fresh for me. It's going to keep it a game that I'm happy to continuously dive into because I just want to try all the combinations. I want to try adding more events. I haven't gone through most of the event deck yet. I've only just started adding it, and then there's so many different ways, and the objectives, and there's so many objectives. There's a ton of stuff to continuously explore here, and the solid but not necessarily amazing foundation combined with that variety has me really engaged and continuing to dive down into it. If not for those extra things, this would probably be a 3.5 out of 5 for me, but those things are here, and it's all in the base game. It's not an expansion. I'm going to give this a 4 to 5. I really like it. It is simple. It is direct. It's not breaking any amazing whatevers as far as what it's doing. It combines polyomino placement with a little bit of a tableau, but not like a huge tableau, just a little bit of a point track, combines with some text that I do appreciate and some other elements that just give you enough of a game here that I am intrigued and interested in continuing to dive down into it. As far as other game recommendations, if you're looking for other games to pay attention to, Isle of Cats is going to be another polyomino game that takes things to the next level. That's in the top 100 on Board Game Geek and is worth checking out. And then Cosmic Colonies. If you're looking for another simultaneous play space-themed polyomino game, those 3 words exist in Cosmic Colonies from the people who make Sagrada. I'm blanking on their name. I'm blanking on the company that makes Sagrada. I don't remember. I'm sorry. I'll have that link down below in some way. But in any case, that's Floodgate Games. That's the one. And then lastly, a final note. If you want to try Planet Unknown, this is actually on Sovereignty. Sovereignty is a platform you may or may not have heard of. I'll link to that down below as well. But Sovereignty is another online platform, another way to play games. And they do have a paid subscription, but they also have a rotating cast of free games. So you'll have the opportunity to try all their games at different points. And they have Dice Miner, they have Isle of Cats, they have Planet Unknown, they have a whole bunch more. So if you want to check that out, or if you want to dive into Planet Unknown and see if it's a game for you, you can do so over on Sovereignty. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you found this review helpful, and until next time, have a good one.